Hey guys, welcome back to How to Roll Dice. I'm Josh, and this past weekend I had a really crazy amount of gaming happen. I wasn't expecting this at all. Normally we have our Friday night gaming night where I go over to my friend's house and we play one, maybe two board games. And then if we happen to have an open Saturday where my son is away on vacation or visiting family, we'll play another one or two board games at my house with a different group of friends. And so that's what I was sort of expecting to happen, maybe a total of 3 or 4 board games. Instead, we had something like 5 or 6 board games that happened. My wife joined in, we made a visit to a game store. There was just a lot more that we streamed. There was a lot more that happened than I thought we were going to. So I wanted to share sort of the different games that I got to revisit or to purchase or to play through for the first time. So starting off Friday evening, me and my friend Marcus here played Star Wars Rebellion, this very big box game here. If you haven't seen me talk about it before, Star Wars Rebellion is by Fantasy Flight Games. It is an epic 1 versus 1 almost tabletop miniatures game that fills up quite a bit of space, and it's a very grand game. Each player is going to play one of the 2 factions. So one player is going to play the Empire, the other player is going to play as the Rebellion, and the Rebellion is trying to hide the Rebel base in one of the, or on one of the planets around the galaxy, and the Empire is trying to seek it out and destroy it. If the Empire is able to do that before the game ends, the Empire wins. If the Rebellion keeps the base hidden and it is not destroyed by the time the game ends, the Rebellion wins. The Rebellion can also take actions called objectives or complete actions that causes the game to end sooner. So you can actually cut the amount of time down that the Empire has to find you. However, the Empire starts with much more power. They have a larger force overall that they can manipulate. Every round they get to send out probe droids to search planets, so they slowly start to discover where you are not as the Rebellion, which means they're narrowing down where you are. Now, the Rebellion does have the option to move the secret base, kind of secretly, which is nice because you can actually move it to a planet that the Empire has already maybe checked, so they think that that's a safe planet. You sort of slip in behind them and back populate it, and then when they do come across the planet you were originally at, or actually when you reveal the planet that you were originally at, that's no longer beneficial information to them. Well, it is a little bit, but you've sort of escaped for that moment. I, however, around round 5 or 6, failed to do that effectively. Marcus was closing in on me with the Empire. I was hiding on Geonosis. I tried to evacuate at the last minute, but it was too late. He knew that I was there. He ended up storming in with a bunch of ships and a bunch of ground units. You have to survive the round even after you initiate the plan to evacuate the planet to another base. And during that round where I had to survive, he was able to wipe me out. So I only made it 5 or 6 rounds into the game. I will say I was having a hard time figuring out how to complete the objectives to shorten the game so I had a better chance of surviving. I think I only completed 1 or 2, shortening the game from the default 14 rounds down to 12 rounds, and he got me by round 6. So I definitely should have moved sooner. And I probably should have been putting more focus into completing those objectives. But we had a ton of fun. We talked about it for like 20 minutes afterwards. I would love to play more of the game. I would love to play with the 2v2 mechanic where you're playing as a team, and each player on the team actually has a different role. One player is playing as the admiral, the other is playing as the general, and you actually have different actions that you're responsible for taking and sort of managing. I think it would be a lot more fun if you also added in a communication limitation to that, where the players on a team, for example, could only communicate during the first part of a round. Like there was a 5-minute communication window where you could make a plan, and then you couldn't communicate anymore for the rest of the round until the next communication window. I feel like that would recreate thematically the sort of communication breakdowns and challenges of such a large faction. You can also play the game 2 players on the Empire side versus 1 player on the Rebellion side, which I feel like would be the most thematically accurate, especially if you worked in those communication limitations. So the Empire had to deal with the fact that yes, they're bigger, but that causes some issues with carrying communication sort of down the chain of command, and things might fall apart because of that difficulty with communicating, whereas the Rebel Force is a smaller, more nimble group that can sort of pivot on a dime, and that being controlled by 1 player would sort of reflect that in gameplay. So I feel like that would be really cool, but very good game. We very much enjoyed ourselves, and we enjoyed streaming, so we'll probably be doing more of that in the future. Like I said, we had 5 to 7 people watching the whole time. They were chit-chatting with us. It was a lot of fun. Then Saturday came along, and I thought it was just going to be me and my friends Bryant and Sawyer, but then my wife randomly decided she wanted to join in. I think particularly because she wanted to play this game here, which we picked up earlier in the week, Irish Gauge. Now, this is a game that is what I would call a train game. It's the first game in a series called Iron Rails. We don't generally play train games. It's just not something we've ever really gotten into, but it does look really nice. You can look at the art here on the back. I've shown it in the other video, but it's by Ian O'Toole. It looks very nice. I really do like the art style. She wasn't wrong about that. She's a graphic designer, so she wouldn't be. But we actually popped this open and we decided to give it a shot. It's a 3 to 5 player game, so 4 was a nice sweet spot for that. And it was very, very nice. The rules very easy and straightforward. Literally a one sheet of paper rule book, front and back. The game is very heavily financial based or finance based. You're working on managing your money, acquiring different shares in different railroads, causing those railroads to pay out dividends in a way that it benefits you more than anybody else. You're bidding and auctioning off shares in the different railroads so that you get the most outcome whenever dividends come up for a specific rail line that you have the most shares in. It's very much an economics financial kind of game, but it's a ton of fun and it looks very, very nice when it's laid out on the board. So we had a lot of fun with that. Next, we wanted to keep my wife around because we wanted to have 4 players and not 3. 4 players is way better than 3 in the board game world, I'm sure you know. And so we went on to this game here, Everdell. This is actually a game that we picked up back in, I want to say 2017, 2018, while we were at Gen Con. It was actually coming out that year. I think we got it before it even released officially. And we have the creator's signature on the inside of the box. I should say this is the limited edition set or the collector's edition set. This is what the box normally looks like. But it's a really cute game, a really fun engine building game, worker placement game, where you're attempting to build up your little forest town and you're going to populate it with different constructs, which are the different buildings that make up the town. And then you're going to populate it with different critters, which are the citizens of the town. It's got kind of a Seven Wonders vibe because as you're building the different structures into your town, those structures allow you to place specific citizens for free if they're related to that structure. So for example, once you build the post office, you can play the postal pigeon for free. Or once you play the market, you can play the shopkeeper for free. Things like that. It's a very nice looking game. It's got a really cool 3-dimensional board with something called the Ever Tree, which is this massive tree structure that holds the deck of cards as well as some other special event cards. It's got a lot of different replayability to it. I don't know what components are unique to the collector's edition, but we have nice wooden and plastic and metal tokens to represent all of the resources and the spare victory points that you collect throughout the course of the game. Here's a quick look at the actual game itself on the back of the box. And it's funny because we haven't played this in years since we got it. And we liked it then, but it was just we had other games to get to. We thought it was a good game and we kind of moved on. We never circled back to it. And it turns out now, we found out this past year at Gen Con when we visited the booth of the company that makes this game, there have been something like 4 or 5 massive expansions for this game. They all sort of slot into the board like puzzle pieces and make the board almost the size of this table. It's huge. They add a ton of new mechanics. There's like a railway that gets added in. There's a mountainside and an ocean front that get added in. It's really, really cool. We want to go out and pick them up if we can find copies, possibly at Gen Con this year. Also, this game is now rated something like top 35th game overall. I didn't realize that. I assumed it was just some game out there that nobody had ever heard of. It's in the top 50 for games easily. So that's really cool that we owned it way back then and just never knew that it became a thing. But Everdell, lots of fun there. Really had a good time with that. After Everdell, we wanted to go out and grab a couple of coffees. And while we were doing that, we decided to swing by That's Entertainment, which is, as I mentioned, a local sort of pop culture emporium with a very large board gaming section. And while we were there, my wife came across 2 other games that she decided to pick up on a whim. She grabbed the second Iron Rails game, which is Ride the Rails. This is, we thought, just like Irish Gauge, except in America, because you can see American flag on the box there. And if you look at the back of the box, it looks very similar. So at a glance, we sort of just thought, oh, it's the second game in the Iron Rails set. It's just a new board. It's Irish Gauge, except in America. So we picked that up. And then she also wanted to expand on our Dominion collection. And by expand, I mean, we only own the second edition of the base box for Dominion. And she wanted to expand on that because we all like Dominion. And as much versatility as the game has, it's more fun if you have different cards to work in. In fact, it sort of infinitely increases the number of combination of cards you can play by even adding a single second box. So she actually decided to grab Intrigue. They had quite a few different boxes there, but I think Intrigue is actually the second box in the set if you want to buy them chronologically. Not much to show here as far as Dominion is concerned. I don't know if you guys know about the game, but it's basically just a card game. If you've ever heard the term deck building or a deck building card game or board game, Dominion invented the concept of deck building as we know it nowadays. So you have Dominion to thank for that. So we picked up Ride the Rails and Dominion. We then came back to our house and we were kind of fiddling around with the idea of starting a D&D campaign. While we were at That's Entertainment, we were looking at all the different unique and interesting RPG books. I, for one, am a little tired of Dungeons & Dragons, as I've mentioned in the past. It's very vanilla. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's vanilla. And there's so many amazing, different, unique flavors out there that I just don't want to keep having vanilla over and over and over and over and over. And so we were looking at all these different books and I was like, all right, maybe we start with D&D just to see if we're in the mood for an RPG. We go back to the house, we create some characters, maybe run a one-shot, and maybe I decide, okay, well, let's keep going with this, or maybe we'll want to try something different. I own several different systems that I would much rather play. I'd even rather buy a new system and learn that than play a massive campaign of D&D again. But we came back to the house and we were fiddling around with the idea of that, and we kind of got to the point where we're like, we're not really quite in the mood. Like, let's put that on hold maybe next weekend. And so we wanted to play another board game. And since we've been playing so many of what I would call complex looking board games lately that then turn out not to be that complex, we wanted to try this game right here. Brass Birmingham. This is actually the highest rated board game that I own. This is currently rated 3rd on BoardGameGeek.com. And it doesn't seem to be, or at least I didn't think it was that highly rated as far as complexity goes, its weight. But it turns out, as we learned very quickly, it is actually pretty complex. When we opened the box and punched out all the pieces and started reading through the rule book, or I should say my wife started reading through the rule book while I was working on something on my computer, I can't quite remember. She started putting the game together and she was like, this is getting a little too much for me to understand. Can you take a look at this rulebook? And I started flipping through the rulebook and it was pretty complicated. So we decided to put a tutorial video on the TV because that's sort of been helping us in the past few weeks get through sort of more complex rulebooks quickly so we can start playing the game. We watched a 20-minute tutorial on how to play and it was just as confusing. I don't, to this moment, think I could explain to you what the point of the game is, what the goal of your turn should be, how you develop a strategy. It's very, very complex sounding. We set the whole board up and we set up all the player boards and everything. We basically got everything ready to go. And then we watched the tutorial a whole second time to see if maybe we missed something, sort of pausing it and discussing questions amongst ourselves as we went through it. And by the end of it, we still did not understand how to play the game thoroughly or what the goal of the game was or what you were supposed to do on your turn. Here's a quick example of one of the more confusing mechanics of the game. Sort of, it uses this if, then, else, unless system where it's like, if you want to do this, you do, if you want to do X, then simply do Y, unless the current state of the board is such, and then you do Z. Unless the Z would trigger this and then you do M. And then if you don't do M, then N or O or P might happen. So it's this crazy web of sort of like decision tree. And it doesn't really present itself in a way that's easy to remember or easy to follow. If you want to build a factory in the game, okay, you build factories, got it. It's the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain. All right, we're building factories. Good so far. You go ahead and you choose either to play a location card or a factory card. If you play a factory card, that will determine the type of factory, but that you can place it anywhere you want. If you play a location card, that's going to determine the location of the factory, and then location will limit what type of factory can be built there. Not bad so far. Okay, so I choose a location, for example, and one of the factory types that I can build on that location is iron. Okay, so I go ahead and I place my iron factory. Well, I have to pay for my iron factory, which is going to cost some iron. Okay, where do I get the iron? Well, it's not from my own personal pool because you don't have a personal pool of resources. The resources stay on the factories that produce them. So all of our factories, me and my opponents, have resources sitting on them on the board. Well, I can use resources from my own factory, but I can just as easily use resources from an opponent's factory. And I don't even have to pay them anything to do that. The resources are just publicly available. So that first off brings up the question of, okay, why am I building a factory then if anybody can just take my resources? Aren't I just helping the other players? That never really gets answered, but it is true. You can only spend resources from a factory that the factory you're building is connected to, either by canals or by railway, depending on which phase of the game you're playing in. You basically play the entire game twice, first with canals, then with railways. But let's pause on that for a second. So you place your factory, you see what you're linked to that might have iron, and you use the iron that you're connected to, hopefully you're connected to some, to pay for the factory. If you're not connected to any iron, you can buy iron from the marketplace. you have to pay the marketplace to pay for the factory. So you're kind of paying to pay, which is an interesting system. You can also take out loans, which will cause you to have a permanent sort of negative impact on your ability to earn income throughout the rest of the game, but will allow you to buy from the market immediately if you don't have the money to. So, okay, you've chosen what kind of factory you want to place, where to place it, you've placed it, you've figured out how to get the iron, either taking it from yourself or from an opponent or buying it from the market, possibly requiring a loan. Okay, your factory's on the board. Now it spits out iron because it's an iron factory. Do they come off the board to you? No, like I said, they sit on the board on the iron factory for other players to take and use in the future for free. So why would you do that? Also, if the market is currently missing iron, which it might be because you may have just used iron to pay for your iron factory, any iron that gets produced gets vacuumed into the market. So the market is always as full as possible. So you didn't really do anything other than get an iron factory on the board, which is now empty, and you backfilled the market that you emptied to pay for the iron factory. So what have you accomplished? And then on top of that, even if the market isn't empty and the iron actually sits on your factory, it's probably going to disappear into the use of other players' factories before it comes back to you. If it doesn't, though, you can sell the iron for money to the market, which already has iron. It's really complicated. Like, we couldn't wrap our heads around it. There were 4 of us that have played hundreds of games sitting here at the table rewatching a tutorial for the second time with the whole game laid out in front of us holding the rule book. Like, I don't know. I don't know. So we literally stopped and cleaned up the whole game and decided to play Ride the Rails, which is the new Iron Rails game that we had picked up that day, this one right here. And in this, we actually had another sort of nifty surprise. I'm trying to shift these boxes because they're trying to fall on me now. We had another nifty surprise. This is not just Irish Gauge, but in America. This is actually a completely different game that has the same look and vibe as Irish Gauge, but completely different mechanics. In this game, you're actually trying to, for the most part, move different passengers around the country using both your and other players' railways in order to earn income. That income isn't tracked using actual income cards like money. It's tracked on a track that goes around the outside of the board. You're trying to work with other players to create transcontinental railways that go from one side of the country to the other. You're focusing on connecting certain cities because those cities pay out money, like Chicago or some of the Midwestern cities. Where your trains start has to be specific to the color of the train that you're playing. It's not like the opening placements that you have in Irish Gauge. You actually have to start in certain cities that match the color of the railway that you're starting. You don't have access to all of the railways right off the bat. The railways slowly become available as you move from round 1 to round 6, which is the length of the game. There's no auctioning at all in this game. You simply choose what shares you want to have access to once per round. So it's a very interesting, different mechanic, so much so that it does feel like its own unique game, but it's still similar enough that it definitely feels like it's part of the same series. So we had a lot of fun with this. So that was sort of everything that we went through. We streamed the first half of the day Saturday. I streamed the whole game Friday night. And then Sunday we did a bunch of yard work, so no gaming there. We did talk about some RPG options that we might be diving into. I think I might do Dungeons & Dragons, but using a very heavily modified rule set from something called the Index Card RPG, which is a really interesting, unique system that can streamline or sort of set up the mechanics for any D20 style RPG. If you haven't looked into it, I would definitely recommend you check it out. You can get the PDF for the entire 400-page master rulebook for something like $11. Really, really cool. Enjoying reading through that. Already have some ideas about what I want to implement into a D&D campaign to streamline gameplay. But yeah, just a really great weekend of gaming. Picked up a couple of new games, got to play a bunch of new games, got to revisit games that I'd already owned, got to learn that I definitely don't understand how to play Brass Birmingham, but I'm going to look into that. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I'm hoping you guys had just as good of a weekend. If you liked this video, go ahead and subscribe to the channel, set your notification bell to all so you get notified whenever I post more videos like this. I hopefully will have a review up this week, a proper game review. It is going to be Parks. I'm just going to keep saying that until it happens. I also filmed a video that I haven't gotten around to editing yet, but it's a longer video, about 28 minutes, I think, about tabletop miniatures war games and how they differ from board games and what I do and don't like about them and why I sort of have stepped away from them for the most part. But that's a longer video that I'm working on doing the edit for right now. That should be up tomorrow or possibly the day after. But yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed this. Leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Let me know what you thought about the video. Leave comments down below so we can chit chat about stuff, whether it's these games or just anything in general. And I will see you in the next one. Have a good day.